Thick blood ran from Keith Russell's split lip as the grizzled mercenary shot the brains out of 3 more Akamarian soldiers. He was the last one standing between the alien horde and the defenseless human colonists huddled in the bunker behind him. The space-hardened veteran scanned the smoke-filled battlefield, counting at least 40 more scaled alien troops moving into flanking positions with advanced plasma rifles. Their lizard eyes glowed with cruel malice, lusting for human blood. 2 Akamarian mech suits lumbered behind the infantry line, ready to unleash hell. The colony militia lay broken and bleeding in the dirt, moaning for their mothers as they clutched fatal wounds. Keith knew he should be shitting himself with fear. This was a suicide mission against a vastly superior force. By every logical assessment, he was fucked. The Akamarians had better tech, better weapons, and 40-to-1 odds. But Keith Russell was no stranger to impossible odds. He had one advantage the scaly freaks could never match: raw human guts and gallons of icy water flowing through his veins. He would make these alien bastards pay a dear price for every inch of blood-soaked ground. 2 miles away, on a cloaked recon ship hovering silently above the carnage, Karos, the most renowned Akamarian general in a generation, watched the desperate battle unfold with a mix of disgust and reluctant awe. In all his decades of ground combat, he had never seen such a display of sheer tenacity and raw combat prowess from a species so technologically outmatched. The humans should be routing like cattle. They should be throwing down their weapons and begging for mercy. But instead, he saw them forming up and preparing to charge, with Keith Russell at the tip of the spear, covered in the gore of Karos's own soldiers. Maybe the old rebel legends were true. Maybe humans really were too crazy to be beaten, even when they had no right to win. Keith Russell eyed the hulking Akamarian general warily, his pulse rifle still trained squarely on the alien's chest. The rest of his hardened squad kept their weapons locked as well, fingers tense against the triggers. The shock of Karos ordering his own forces to stand down left Keith's battle-fogged mind reeling. Deep in his gut, the wary mercenary sensed a trap. "Steady!" Keith growled to his squad, his aim never wavering from the approaching alien leader. "Bastard tries anything squirrely, you ventilate him." Karos stopped a dozen paces away from the battered human line. The massive Akamarian reached up slowly to his helmet, his movements deliberate and non-threatening under the human's twitchy gun sights. With a hiss of releasing pressure seals, Karos removed his battle helm and clipped it to his belt. "Keith Russell of Earth," Karos began, his voice a deep, rasping growl. "I am General Karos of the 7th Akamarian Assault Legion. I no longer wish to fight against you or your people. I am here to talk, warrior to warrior." Keith spat a glob of bloody phlegm into the dirt. "Talk? What's to talk about? You and your scaly friends seemed perfectly fucking content to wipe us out 2 minutes ago." Karos nodded slowly, his reptilian eyes ancient and weary. "I watched you fight. I have never seen such courage, such unrelenting ferocity from a species so outmatched. It made me realize the fundamental error of our aggression against humanity." Keith narrowed his eyes, searching for any hint of deception in the Akamarian's demeanor. But he found only a bone-deep exhaustion, the look of a tired old soldier, sick of endless bloodshed. Against his instincts, Keith found himself lowering his weapon. "Why? Why the sudden change of heart? Why now, after all the death and destruction your kind has brought to our colonies?" Karos sighed, a dry, rasping sound. "The Akamarian leadership fears you, Keith Russell. They fear humanity's relentless advancement and unconquerable spirit. They believe that the only way to ensure our survival is to beat you into submission or wipe you out. But I see now that such a thing is impossible." "We're not looking for war," Keith said quietly. "We want to explore, to build, to learn, but we'll never stop fighting for our right to live free." Something like a smile flickered across Karos's scaled visage. "I understand that now, and I can no longer be a part of my people's misguided aggression. I wish to defect, to share what I know of Akamarian secrets in exchange for asylum among your people." Keith barked a short, incredulous laugh. "Asylum? You're joking, right? Even if I agreed, even if I trusted you, how the hell would I sneak a giant lizard onto a shuttle back to Sol? You'd stick out like a sore thumb on my ship." Karos's eyes gleamed. Not if I lower my personal cloaking field. Akamarian officers are equipped with light-bending technology for stealth ops. I can make myself invisible to visual scanning and ship sensors. I could walk right up your boarding ramp unseen. Keith chewed his split lip, wincing as he weighed the risks. Karos was right. His intel could change the direction of the whole damn war. With an Akamarian general advising the human resistance... "All right," Keith growled finally. "We smuggle you off-world and you spill everything you know about how to kick your species' collective scaly ass. And I swear to Christ, you even breathe funny in the direction of my crew. I'll space your reptile hideout and airlock." Keith managed a blood-flecked smile. The two grizzled warriors, forged and scarred by a lifetime of battle, regarded each other with a strange new understanding. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor, throwing an alien defector in his lap. But if it gave humanity a fighting chance, then maybe, just maybe, this crazy war wasn't a lost cause after all. Keith slung his rifle and motioned to his wary squad. "Pack it up and prep the shuttle for bug-out, boys. Looks like we're hauling a big fucking lizard back to High Command for debriefing. Should be a real barrel of laughs." No sooner had Keith and Karos begun to hash out the details of their audacious plan than a klaxon blared across the battlefield. Keith's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing, as he saw a massive Akamarian fleet dropping out of hyperspace in low orbit. "Shit, reinforcements already?" Keith snarled, his fingers tightening on his rifle. Karos's scales paled to a sickly grey. That's General Zaxxon's flagship. He commands the Akamarian Expeditionary Armada. He outranks me and then some." As if on cue, Karos's wrist communicator crackled to life. "General Karos, report. Why have you withdrawn from the field of battle?" Karos shot Keith a meaningful look before responding. "General Zaxxon, I have managed to capture a high-value human prisoner. I was preparing to transport him to a secure facility for interrogation." There was a moment of heavy silence. Then Zaxxon's voice returned, dripping with smug satisfaction. "Well done, Karos. But I'll be taking custody of this prisoner myself. Prepare to transfer him to my flagship immediately." Karos ground his teeth, thinking fast. "With respect, General Zaxxon, I would prefer to personally escort the prisoner to the secure facility. He is a crafty one, and I don't trust anyone else to keep him contained." Another pause. Keith could practically hear the gears turning in Zaxxon's head, weighing the glory of personally interrogating a key human prisoner against the risk of the captive escaping. "Very well, Karos," Zaxxon said finally, his tone oily with false magnanimity. "You may accompany your prisoner to my ship, but I expect a full debriefing upon your arrival, and the human had better arrive unharmed." "Understood, General. Karos out." The Akamarian turned to Keith, his expression grim. "We don't have much time. We need to get you into a prisoner disguise and on that ship before Zaxxon gets suspicious." Keith nodded, already stripping off his battle-worn armor. "Let's get this freak show on the road then. I've always wanted to see the inside of an Akamarian torture chamber." Minutes later, a battered Akamarian shuttle lifted off from the blood-soaked battlefield, carrying a grim-faced Karos and a manacled Keith in the back, surrounded by a contingent of Karos's most trusted soldiers. As the shuttle approached the looming bulk of Zaxxon's flagship, Keith leaned in close to Karos, his voice a barely audible whisper. "Just get me to a computer terminal, and I'll slice into their systems. We need to find out what these scaly bastards are planning." Karos nodded imperceptibly. "Leave that to me. Just be ready to move when the time comes." The shuttle shuddered as it set down in the flagship's cavernous hangar bay. Keith let himself be roughly hauled to his feet by the Akamarian guards, playing the part of the defeated prisoner. As they marched him down the ramp, he counted no less than 36 armed soldiers waiting for them, with Zaxxon himself standing imperiously at their head. "Bring the prisoner to the interrogation block," Zaxxon ordered, his eyes glinting with cruel anticipation. "I want to know every human secret he carries in his primitive skull." Karos stepped forward, placing himself subtly between Keith and Zaxxon. "I must insist on overseeing the interrogation personally, General. This human is my capture and my responsibility. Zaxxon's lip curled in a sneer, but he waved a clawed hand in acquiescence. As you wish, Karos, but do not forget who commands here. As the guards marched Keith and Karos deeper into the bowels of the ship, Keith shot his unlikely ally a quick, conspiratorial glance. They were in the belly of the beast now, with no room for error. The fate of Earth itself hung in the balance. As Keith and Karos's battered fighter streaked through Earth's atmosphere, warning klaxons blared across every military channel. Before they even touched down, a phalanx of heavily armed soldiers surrounded their landing pad, weapons trained on the stolen Akamarian ship. The moment Keith emerged, hands raised, he was swarmed by a dozen men, forced to his knees and roughly cuffed. Karos, towering and alien in his scaled armor, received an even harsher welcome. Stun batons crackled and hissed as the soldiers warily circled the Akamarian general, their faces twisted with loathing. "Stand down," Keith barked, struggling against his restraints. "He's with me. Karos defected. He's on our side." But the soldiers, twitchy and on edge, ignored him. They jabbed and prodded at Karos, forcing him to his knees even as the proud warrior refused to flinch. Hours later, in a stark interrogation cell deep beneath Earth's surface, Keith and Karos sat bruised and weary, facing a tribunal of Earth's most decorated military leaders. Generals and admirals, their chests heavy with medals, glared at the unlikely pair with undisguised suspicion. "You expect us to believe," growled Admiral Vickers, his eyes hard as flint, "that one of the Akamarian's most notorious butchers had a sudden change of heart, that he's willing to betray his own kind?" Keith leaned forward, meeting Vickers' gaze unflinchingly. "I watched this man turn against his own soldiers, Admiral. He saved my life and the lives of my squad. Without him, we'd all be dead, and you'd have no warning of what's coming." Beside him, Karos shifted, his alien features inscrutable. "I understand your distrust," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper. "I have done terrible things in the name of my people's misguided cause, but I swear to you, on the blood of my fallen comrades, that I am here to help." For the next several hours, Karos laid bare the secrets of the Akamarian war machine. He described in unflinching detail their ships, their weapons, their numbers. The grim-faced humans listened, their expressions hardening with each revelation. But it was Karos's account of the planned invasion of Earth that sent a ripple of true fear through the room. The Akamarians, he revealed, had been secretly amassing a vast armada beyond the fringes of known space, waiting for the perfect moment to strike at humanity's heart. As he spoke, Karos's voice grew heavy with the weight of his own complicity. "I was there," he said softly, his eyes distant. "I helped plan the attacks, the targeted strikes against your civilian populations. I believed it was necessary to protect my own people. But I see now the depths of my error, the blood on my hands." In the silence that followed, Keith saw the flicker of uncertainty in the eyes of the human leaders, the dawning realization that they faced an existential threat unlike any before. Admiral Vickers leaned back in his chair, his expression calculating. "You say you wish to help, Karos. How? What can one Akamarian traitor offer us that could possibly turn the tide?" Karos met his gaze steadily. "Knowledge, Admiral. I know every weakness in their ships, every flaw in their battle strategies. I can help you fortify your defenses, train your soldiers to fight as they do. And when the time comes, I will stand with you and face the judgment of my own kind." In the end, the humans agreed to grant Karos provisional asylum, with Keith assigned as his handler and guide. As the two warriors left the briefing room, Keith couldn't help but marvel at the strange twists of fate that had led them here. In the weeks that followed, Keith and Karos worked tirelessly to prepare Earth's defenses. They pored over battle plans, analyzed intelligence reports, and drilled human soldiers in the art of Akamarian warfare. Slowly, grudgingly, a bond began to form between them, a shared understanding forged in the crucible of an impossible war. But even as they planned and prepared, a new threat was gathering in the shadows. A faction of humans, their hearts poisoned by xenophobia and distrust, saw Karros's presence as the ultimate betrayal. They struck without warning, a series of brutal attacks aimed at assassinating the Akamarian defector. Keith, his instincts honed by a lifetime of battle, barely managed to push Karros out of the path of a sniper's plasma bolt. As alarms blared and soldiers rushed to respond, Keith knew with sudden, sinking certainty that their fight was far from over. Now, with enemies on all sides and time running out, Keith and Karros would have to find a way to unite humanity against the coming darkness, or watch as everything they fought for turned to ashes. In the depths of Earth's most secure military installation, Keith and Karros pored over a dizzying array of intelligence reports, intercepted transmissions, and classified documents. They worked late into the night, fueled by a growing sense of unease and urgency. "There," Karros hissed, jabbing a clawed finger at a grainy surveillance photo. "That human admiral, the one shaking hands with the Akamarian delegation? I know him. He's one of ours." Keith squinted at the image, his brow furrowed. "Admiral Jameson? That can't be right. He's a decorated war hero, a trusted leader." But even as the words left his mouth, Keith felt a sinking sensation in his gut. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Over the next several days, Keith and Karros worked tirelessly to unravel the web of Akamarian infiltration. They followed leads, called in favors, and pieced together a staggering conspiracy that reached into the highest echelons of human power. Sleeper agents, some in place for decades, had worked to undermine Earth's defenses from within. They sabotaged weapons systems, leaked sensitive intel, and sowed discord among the ranks. "We have to stop them," Keith growled, his hands clenched into fists. "We have to root them out before it's too late." Their investigation led them to a hidden base on the far side of Earth's moon, a secret Akamarian stronghold that had gone undetected for years. There, using Karros's knowledge of Akamarian tactics and Keith's combat prowess, they infiltrated the facility. Inside, they found a staggering cache of weapons and equipment, enough to arm a small invasion force, and at the center of it all, a group of high-ranking Akamarian agents, busily preparing for the coming assault. The battle was fierce and bloody, a desperate struggle in the cold vacuum of space. Keith and Karros fought side by side, human and Akamarian united against a common foe. They pushed deeper into the base, determined to capture the Akamarian leaders and uncover the full extent of their plans. But as they breached the command center, alarms blared to life throughout the facility. The Akamarian agents, realizing they were compromised, had sent a desperate signal to the incoming invasion fleet. "They know," Karros snarled, his eyes widening in realization. "They know I've betrayed them. They'll be on high alert now." Keith slammed a fist into the bulkhead, his mind racing. The element of surprise, their most valuable asset, had been lost. The Akamarians would be prepared for Earth's defenses now, ready to counter every strategy and contingency. As if on cue, the base's sensors lit up with a flurry of warnings. Dozens of Akamarian ships had just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system, their weapons hot and shields raised. Keith and Karros exchanged a loaded glance, the weight of the moment settling heavy on their shoulders. There was no more time for planning or preparation. The battle for Earth, for the very future of humanity, had begun. Racing back to their stolen shuttle, the unlikely allies blasted free of the moon base, pushing their engines to the limit as they streaked towards Earth. In orbit, they could already see the flashes of distant explosions as the first wave of Akamarian fighters clashed with Earth's outer defenses. Keith gripped the controls, his knuckles white as Karros frantically worked to hail Earth's military command. They had to warn them, had to mobilize every ship and soldier for the fight to come. As they tore through the atmosphere, Keith looked to Karros, seeing the same grim determination etched in the alien warrior's face. They had started this journey as enemies, but now, in the face of annihilation, they stood as brothers in arms. The shuttle touched down on a scorched landing pad, amid the chaos of scrambling defense forces and screaming alarms. Keith and Karros leapt from the cockpit, weapons in hand, ready to lead the charge. Above them, the sky burned with the fires of war, as the full might of the Akamarian armada bore down on humanity's last bastion. The odds were stacked against them, the future uncertain. But one thing was clear. Earth would not go quietly into the night. They would fight to the last man and woman, to the last breath and drop of blood. And with Keith and Karos at the vanguard, they just might have a chance. The battle for Earth had begun, and the fate of humanity hung in the balance. Keith and Karos fought like men possessed, blasting and slashing their way through the bowels of the Akamarian flagship. Alarms blared and enemy soldiers poured from every corridor, but the two warriors were an unstoppable force, driven by desperation and a shared resolve to end this war once and for all. "Bridge is just ahead," Karos growled, consulting a holographic map of the ship. "Zaxxon will be there, directing the battle. If we can take him out—" A plasma bolt sizzled past Keith's helmet, forcing him to duck behind a bulkhead. "We'll throw the whole damn invasion into chaos," he finished grimly. They pushed forward, clearing room after room with brutal efficiency. But as they neared the bridge, the resistance intensified. Elite Akamarian guards, armed with disruptor rifles and pulse grenades, formed a living wall between them and their target. Keith and Karos took cover, trading fire with the entrenched defenders. "We're not getting through this, not without a miracle," Keith panted, his rifle growing hot in his hands. Karos bared his teeth in a feral grin. "Then let's make a miracle." Before Keith could stop him, the Akamarian warrior primed a pulse grenade and charged headlong into the enemy fire. He took multiple hits, his armor smoking and sparking, but he didn't slow. With a roar, he hurled the grenade into the densest knot of defenders. The explosion shook the corridor, the shockwave hurling Keith back against the bulkhead. His ears ringing, he staggered to his feet, expecting to see Karos's broken body. But the Akamarian was still standing, his armor shredded and blood seeping from a dozen wounds. The elite guards lay dead or dying, the way to the bridge clear. Keith fought down a surge of respect for his unlikely ally. "Hell of a move. You sure you're not part human?" Karos chuckled wetly, dark blood flecking his lips. "Let's finish this." They burst onto the bridge, weapons leveled, but found only Zaxxon waiting for them. The Akamarian general stood calmly at the viewport, hands clasped behind his back, as he watched the battle raging outside. "Ah, Karos," he said without turning, "I wondered when you would come." Karos aimed his rifle squarely at Zaxxon's head. "It's over, Zaxxon. Call off the attack. No one else needs to die today." Zaxxon laughed, a cold and mirthless sound. "Oh, I rather think they do, especially the humans, and you're going to help me, Karos." Karos's finger tightened on the trigger. "Like hell I will." "You already have." Zaxxon finally turned, his eyes glinting with cruel amusement. "Did you really think your defection was your own choice? That you could betray your own kind so easily?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed Karos's face. "What are you talking about?" Zaxxon tapped a button on his wrist console. Instantly Karos stiffened, his eyes going wide and glassy. His rifle clattered to the deck as he clutched at his skull, a scream tearing from his throat. "Neural control chip," Zaxxon said casually, as if discussing the weather. "Implanted during your last loyalty screening. We've been monitoring your every thought, your every move, your defection, your little alliance with the humans, all part of the plan." Keith leveled his own weapon at Zaxxon, his mind reeling. "You used him, you used us all." "Of course I did," Zaxxon sneered, "and you played your parts perfectly. Even now Earth's defenses are in disarray, expecting an attack that will never come. They're ripe for the slaughter." On the deck, Karos writhed and convulsed, fighting against the control chip with every fiber of his being. With a titanic effort, he lifted his head, locking eyes with Keith. "Go!" he gritted out through clenched teeth. "One, Earth!" Keith hesitated, torn between helping his friend and his duty. But Karos, with a last surge of willpower, lunged at Zaxxon, tackling him to the deck. The two Akamarians grappled, snarling and clawing at each other. "Go!" Karos roared. Keith went, He sprinted from the bridge, alarms and shouts chasing him through the corridors. In the hangar bay, he leapt into the nearest Akamarian fighter, not even bothering with a flight suit. The small craft blasted free of the flagship, immediately set upon by the Akamarian cap. Keith jinked and juked, pushing the alien fighter to its limits as plasma fire stitched the void around him. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Commander Keith Russell. Authentication Foxtrot Zulu Niner," he practically screamed into the comms. "The Akamarians have infiltrated Earth's defenses. This is all a ruse. Repeat, the invasion is a trick." Static and silence answered him. The Akamarians were jamming the frequencies. Cursing, Keith wrenched his fighter into a desperate dive, trying to put some distance between him and his pursuers. If he could just reach Earth, if he could just warn them in time. Behind him, the Akamarian flagship suddenly blossomed into a miniature sun, a massive explosion ripping through its hull. Keith flinched away from the glare, his heart clenching as he realized what it meant. Keros? The crazy bastard had done it. He'd sacrificed himself to cripple the Akamarian command ship, maybe the entire invasion. Blinking away tears, Keith gunned his engines, rocketing towards Earth with renewed determination. Keros had given him a chance, slim as it was. He wouldn't waste it. The blue-green jewel of humanity's homeworld swelled in his viewscreen, beautiful and fragile against the infinite dark of space. Akamarian ships swarmed around it like angry wasps, their weapons gouging molten scars across its surface. But as Keith watched, a new wave of ships surged up from the planet to meet them head-on. Earth's true defenses, hidden until now, revealed in all their fierce glory. Keith opened a channel, praying to any god that might be listening. "This is Commander Keith Russell, calling any Earth forces. The Akamarians are vulnerable. Their command ship is destroyed. Hit them now. Hit them with everything we've got." For a moment, he thought his transmission had been lost in the chaos. But then a crackling response. "Affirmative, Commander Russell. We read you," commencing full counterattack. "And thank you. Whoever your Akamarian friend was, we won't forget his sacrifice." Keith swallowed hard past the sudden lump in his throat. "Roger that. Give 'em hell. Russell out." He swung his fighter around, angling back towards the raging battle. He had a promise to keep to a fallen brother, to a friend. Earth would not fall this day. Humanity would not be broken, not while he still drew breath, not while any of them still fought. For Earth, for Keros, for the future. With a defiant roar, Keith Russell flung his ship into the maelstrom, guns blazing, one man against an empire. But he was human, and that was enough. The Akamarian fleet reeled in the wake of their flagship's destruction, their formation crumbling as ships scattered in disarray. On the bridge of the human command ship, a cheer went up as Keith strode in, his armor still smoking from the battle. "Status report," he barked, taking his place at the central holotable. "The Akamarians are in full retreat, sir," a young officer reported, her eyes shining with relief and pride. "Their lines are breaking. We've got them on the run." Keith nodded, his gaze fixed on the tactical display. "Press the attack. Don't let them regroup. We finish this now." Under Keith's command, the human fleet surged forward, chasing down the fleeing Akamarian ships and unleashing a withering barrage of fire. One by one, the alien vessels winked out, reduced to expanding clouds of debris. But even as the tide of battle turned, a dying Akamarian soldier, his lifeblood pooling on the deck of a crippled ship, gasped out a final warning to his human captors. "You fools," he rasped, his breath rattling in his chest. "You have no idea what you've done. The weapon. It's already—" The soldier's words dissolved into a gurgling cough, his eyes rolling back in his skull. But it was enough. Keith felt a chill run down his spine as the implications sank in. He turned to his intelligence officer, his voice urgent. "Get me everything we have on this weapon, now." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The Akamarians, their own worlds depleted and dying, had set their sights on Earth not just for conquest, but for its rich mineral resources. Resources they needed to fuel a doomsday weapon capable of destroying entire planets. "It's on a moon in the Kairos system," Keith said, his eyes hard as he studied the intel reports. Heavily guarded, fortified to the teeth, they were going to use Earth's resources to power it, wipe us out, and then use the weapon to subjugate the rest of the galaxy. Within hours, Keith had assembled a small elite team of his most trusted soldiers, men and women he'd fought beside in countless battles. They loaded up on a stealth shuttle, checking weapons and gear as they prepared to infiltrate the Akamarian base. "We get in, we find that weapon and we blow it to hell," Keith said, his voice hard and determined. "And if we find any of our people in there, any prisoners, we get them out. No one gets left behind." The shuttle sliced through the void, hugging the contours of the moon to avoid detection. They set down in a narrow ravine, the rocky walls looming on either side as the team disembarked. They moved quickly and quietly, picking their way through the treacherous terrain towards the base. Overhead, Akamarian patrol ships buzzed like angry hornets, searchlights sweeping the rugged landscape. At the base's perimeter, hidden auto turrets swiveled to track their approach, humming with deadly energy. Keith signaled to his tech specialist, a wiry woman named Jax, who grinned as she pulled out a jury-rigged hacking device. "Child's play," she muttered as she worked, her fingers flying over the makeshift keyboard. Moments later, the turrets powered down with a low whine, their lights fading to black. Keith led the way as they slipped inside, the corridors eerily quiet save for the distant thrum of machinery. But as they pushed deeper into the facility, they heard something else, the unmistakable sound of human screams. They burst into a cavernous laboratory, weapons drawn, and froze in horror at the sight before them. Human prisoners, strapped to operating tables and writhing in agony, as Akamarian scientists conducted gruesome experiments on their still-living bodies. Keith's finger tightened on the trigger, his vision tunneling to a single searing point of focus. These Akamarian bastards, not content with conquest and slaughter, had stooped to the unthinkable. "Take them out," he snarled, "every last one of them." Keith opened fire, his plasma rifle spitting blue-white bolts of superheated death. The Akamarian scientists fell, their twisted experiments on helpless humans forever ended by the vengeful wrath of Keith Russell and his hardened band of elite soldiers. Quickly the team spread out through the gruesome laboratory, shooting the locks on the cruel restraints binding the sobbing, tortured humans to the blood-stained exam tables. Keith helped a rail-thin man sit up, wincing at the awful wounds and surgical scars marring his emaciated body. "So you're safe now," Keith said gruffly, his voice thick with emotion. "We're getting you out of here." Among the prisoners, one woman stood out, her bearing proud and defiant despite her ragged prison garb, and the bruises mottling her face. She introduced herself as Dr. Lara Novak, a brilliant xenobiologist who had been captured during a scientific expedition. As the rescued humans huddled together, Dr. Novak pulled Keith aside, her eyes blazing with a feverish intensity. "I've been studying the Akamarians as they experimented on us," she said urgently. "I've found a weakness, a flaw in their biology. We can use it against them, create a bioweapon that targets only their physiology." Keith frowned, conflicted. Bioweapons were a line he'd never crossed, a horror he'd sworn to oppose. But with the fate of humanity at stake, with the evil he'd witnessed in this blood-soaked lab— "All right," he said heavily. "We'll split up. Half of us will assault the doomsday weapon control room. The rest will follow your lead, Doctor. Let's gut these alien fuckers at the source." With a nod, Dr. Novak rallied the healthiest of the rescued prisoners, leading them towards the research labs to begin the desperate work. Keith watched them go, then turned to his own team, his jaw set with grim determination. As Keith's fire team battled through the twisting corridors, the resistance intensified, the Akamarians throwing themselves at the human intruders with increasing desperation. Plasma beams crisscrossed through the alien metal halls, the staccato barks of human assault rifles answering in defiant chorus. At last, They breached the final blast doors, spilling into the cavernous chamber housing the doomsday weapon's pulsing, ominous core. And there, standing before the massive device, was a towering Akamarian clad in ornate armor, his eyes burning with hateful recognition as they fixed on Keith. "Russell," the alien warlord hissed, drawing a crackling energy glaive. "I trained Karos, taught him everything he knew, and now I will carve his killer's entrails from his still-living body." The two warriors collided in a whirlwind of slashing blades and hammering blows, human skill and tenacity pitted against alien strength and savagery. Keith felt his bones shudder with each blocked strike, his muscles screaming as he pushed himself beyond human limits. A slash of the glaive opened Keith's cheek to the bone. A precise stab of the combat knife took out one of the warlord's eyes. They fought in a growing pool of mingled red and black blood, neither willing to yield. With a roar of pure primal fury, Keith slammed his skull into the Akamarian's face, shattering his own nose but stunning his foe for a vital heartbeat. In that sliver of an opening, Keith buried his knife to the hilt in the warlord's throat, twisting savagely. The Akamarian toppled, his lifeblood gushing between his grasping claws. Keith staggered back, his vision graying at the edges, his battered body pushed to the brink. But the fight wasn't over. "Plant the charges," he rasped to his team, his voice wet with blood. "Burn this fucking place down." As the demolition experts rigged the weapon's core with high-yield plasma charges, Keith forced himself to stay upright, his rifle trained on the room's entrances. They had to hold until the detonation sequence was set. Just a few more minutes, just a little longer. The bioweapon, a swirling vortex of engineered nanites, swept through the Akamarian guards in a thrumming cloud. They convulsed on the floors and hallways, bodies jerking and seizing as the nanites targeted their nervous systems with lethal precision. Dr. Novak's face was pale but resolute as she led the charge to the evac point, her fellow prisoners providing covering fire against the base's crumbling defenses. The countdown timer on the doomsday weapon's meltdown sequence flashed blood red on every screen, 2 minutes remaining. Keith and his team staggered through the chaos, coughing on the caustic smoke billowing from the sabotaged reactor. Alarms howled and metal buckled as they made their way to the hangar, the whole structure shaking itself to pieces around them. There the evac shuttle waited, its engines already roaring. Dr. Novak waved them aboard, her filthy face streaked with tears of exhausted relief. Keith staggered up the ramp, the last to board, his uniform drenched with his own blood and that of the Akamarian warlord. He collapsed into a crash seat as the shuttle rocketed into the sky, watching through the viewport as the moon base erupted in a cataclysmic fireball behind them, the doomsday weapon and its foul creators reduced to radioactive dust. A strange calm settled over Keith as he finally let himself slip into unconsciousness, the pain of his wounds fading into a distant buzz. They had done it. Humanity had a fighting chance, and Karos, his unlikely friend and ally, had been avenged. But even as he drifted off, Keith knew their fight was far from over. The Akamarians were still out there, reeling from this blow but not yet beaten. There would be other battles, other sacrifices. For now, though, he let himself rest, dreaming of a future where humans and aliens could coexist in peace, their shared hopes and dreams vaster than any void of space. As the smoke cleared and the dust settled on the shattered remains of the Akamarian doomsday weapon, Keith felt a momentary surge of triumph. They had done it. Against all odds, humanity had struck a decisive blow against their alien foes, crippling their ability to threaten Earth and its colonies. But the euphoria was short-lived. Within hours of the mission's success, disturbing reports began to filter in from the far reaches of Akamarian space. The bioweapon, it seemed, had mutated beyond its original design, becoming an airborne plague that swept through the Akamarian worlds like a scythe through ripe wheat. Entire cities lay silent and still, their streets littered with the bodies of the dead and dying. The once mighty Akamarian war fleet drifted aimlessly, their crews decimated by the relentless spread of the disease. In a matter of days, The Akamarian Empire had been brought to its knees, not by the might of human arms, but by the unintended consequences of humanity's own desperate gambit. In the halls of power on Earth, the news was greeted with a mix of grim satisfaction and uneasy disquiet. Many saw it as a fitting end to a hated foe, a karmic retribution for the untold lives the Akamarians had taken in their ruthless conquest. Others, Keith and Dr. Novak among them, couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility, a nagging guilt at the sheer scale of the suffering they had unleashed, however unintentionally. That guilt only deepened when the message arrived from the Akamarian homeworld, a plea for help from a species on the brink of extinction. In a stunning reversal, the once proud warriors offered their unconditional surrender, their weapons and territory, in exchange for human aid in finding a cure for the plague. The debate that followed was fierce and divisive. Hardliners argued that the Akamarians deserved their fate, that humanity owed them nothing after the atrocities they had committed. Others, guided by a belief in the fundamental value of all sentient life, insisted that to stand by and let an entire species die would be to abandon the very ideals that separated humanity from the worst of its enemies. In the end, pragmatism won out. The opportunity to gain access to Akamarian technology and resources, to shape the future of a former adversary, was too valuable to pass up. Aid would be given, but with strict conditions. The Akamarians would submit to complete demilitarization and human oversight, their society reshaped according to human values and interests. For Keith, the sudden shift from soldier to diplomat was jarring. But as he stepped off the transport ship onto the scorched earth of the Akamarian homeworld, he understood the importance of his new mission. He was here to build a bridge between two species, to guide a ravaged civilization back from the brink. At his side stood Dr. Novak, her brilliant mind already racing with ideas for how to combat the plague. Together, they would work to undo the damage wrought by the war, to find a path to coexistence in the aftermath of near annihilation. As they were escorted through the rubble-strewn streets by a contingent of haggard Akamarian soldiers, Keith couldn't help but notice the haunted looks in the eyes of the civilians they passed. These were not the cruel, ruthless monsters he had once fought, but a people broken by war and disease, their once vibrant culture reduced to ashes. At the government centre, they were greeted by the newly appointed Prime Minister, a battle-scarred veteran of the Akamarian resistance. In the war, he had been a thorn in the side of the military junta, a voice for peace and reason drowned out by the drums of conquest. Now, with the old order shattered, he had risen to lead his people through their darkest hour. As Keith shook the Prime Minister's hand, he saw in the alien leader's eyes a mix of gratitude and wariness, hope and trepidation. In that moment, he realized that the true battle was just beginning. Winning the war had been a feat of arms and courage. Building the peace would be a test of empathy and understanding, a challenge to see beyond the divisions of species and culture. It was a challenge Keith found himself unexpectedly ready to embrace, for in the ruins of a shattered world, he saw the chance for something new to grow, a future where human and Akamarian might stand together not as enemies, but as partners in the vast, uncertain frontier of the galaxy. The work ahead would be hard, the path forward fraught with obstacles and setbacks. But as Keith looked out over the war-torn landscape, he felt a flicker of something he had never expected to find in the heart of his enemy's homeland: hope. As the dust settled in the wake of the Akamarian surrender, Keith found himself at the center of a delicate web of diplomacy and reconstruction. Working alongside Dr. Novak and the newly appointed Akamarian Prime Minister, he poured himself into the monumental task of rebuilding a shattered society and forging a lasting peace between two once bitter enemies. But even as the first tentative seeds of trust and cooperation began to take root, a new threat emerged from the shadows. In the far reaches of Akamarian space, a faction of hardline loyalists, led by the ruthless warlord Zortak, seethed with resentment at what they saw as a betrayal of their species' warrior heritage. "We will never submit to the humans," Zortak snarled, his clawed fists clenched in defiance. "We will fight on until every last one of their kind is driven from our galaxy. With stolen ships and weapons, Zortak's forces struck like lightning, targeting human and Akamarian outposts with brutal precision. Supply lines were cut, colonies razed, and the fragile peace Keith had worked so hard to build began to fray at the edges. "We have to stop them," Keith said grimly as reports of the attacks flooded in. "If we don't, all of this, the sacrifices, the progress we've made, it'll all be for nothing." Dr. Novak nodded, her face etched with worry. "But how? Zortak's forces are scattered, hidden. We don't even know where to begin looking." Keith's jaw tightened. "We start with what we know. We gather intelligence, we pool our resources, and when we find them, we hit them hard and fast with everything we've got." It was easier said than done. For months, Keith and his allied forces played a deadly game of cat and mouse with Zortak's insurgents, chasing down leads and engaging in brutal skirmishes across the stars. But with each passing day, Keith could feel the weight of the war pressing down on him, the toll of the constant fighting and the lives lost under his command. In the quiet moments between battles, he found himself thinking of Karos, of the sacrifice his friend had made for the sake of peace. "I wish you were here," Keith murmured one night, staring out at the stars from the bridge of his ship. "You'd know what to do, you always did." But Karos was gone, and the burden of leadership fell to Keith alone. He shouldered it as best he could, driven by a grim determination to see the fight through to the end. That end came on a nameless moon, on the edge of Akamarian space. Intelligence reports had placed Zortak's main base there, hidden in the depths of a sprawling industrial complex. Keith led the assault himself, a joint force of human and Akamarian soldiers at his back. The battle was fierce and bloody, a desperate close-quarters melee through twisting corridors and smoke-filled chambers. Keith fought like a man possessed, his rifle blazing and his combat knife flashing in the dim light. At last he found himself face to face with Zortak himself, the warlord's eyes blazing with hate and defiance. "You think you've won, human," Zortak spat, circling Keith like a predator. "You think your kind can rule over us? We will never stop fighting. We will never stop resisting." Keith said nothing. He met Zortak's charge with a clash of blades, and the two warriors became a whirlwind of steel and fury, trading blows with brutal precision. In the end, it was Keith who emerged victorious, his blade finding its mark in Zortak's chest. But the victory came at a great cost. As the warlord fell, his lifeblood pooling on the cold metal floor, Keith staggered back, his own wounds bleeding freely. He slumped against a wall, his vision blurring as the sounds of the battle faded around him. In that moment, as he teetered on the edge of consciousness, he saw a figure approaching through the haze. It was Karos, his features ghostly and translucent, but his smile warm and familiar. "You did it, Keith," the Akamarian said softly, kneeling beside his friend. "You brought peace, just as I knew you would." Karos shook his head. "You have nothing to apologize for. You've done more than I could have ever asked, more than anyone could have asked." Keith's vision was fading now, the edges of the world turning grey and indistinct. With a last rasping breath he reached out, his blood-stained fingers passing through Karos's spectral form. "Watch over them," he whispered. "The humans, the Akamarians, guide them, help them find it to a better way." And with that, Keith Russell, the hero who had united two worlds, passed from the realm of the living, his final mission complete. The news of Keith's death spread like wildfire, casting a pall of grief over the fledgling alliance. On Earth, flags flew at half-mast, while on the Akamarian homeworld the Prime Minister declared a period of planetary mourning. In the halls of power, and in the streets of shattered cities, humans and Akamarians alike spoke Keith's name with reverence and sorrow, remembering the man who had given everything for the sake of peace. But none felt the loss more keenly than Dr. Lara Novak. She had been there at the beginning, had witnessed firsthand the horrors of the war and the lengths to which Keith had gone to end it. In Keith, she had found not just a colleague and a leader, but a true friend, someone who understood the weight of the burdens they carried. Now with Keith gone, Lara threw herself into her work with a renewed intensity. She spent long hours in the lab, poring over samples of the bioweapon, searching for a way to undo the damage it had wrought. It was a lonely vigil, broken only by the occasional visit from the Akamarian Prime Minister or the human ambassador. They would find her hunched over her microscope, dark circles under her eyes, a steaming mug of coffee forgotten at her elbow. "You need to rest," they would say, their voices soft with concern. "Keith wouldn't want you to work yourself to the bone like this." But Lara would just shake her head, a sad smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "This is how I honor him," she would say. "This is how I keep his memory alive." And so she pressed on, driven by the memory of a fallen friend and the hope of a better tomorrow. It was a hope that sustained her through the long years that followed, as the alliance between humanity and the Akamarians grew and flourished. Years turned into decades, and the scars of war began to fade. On the Akamarian homeworld, cities rose from the ashes, their spires gleaming in the warm light of a new dawn. Human and Akamarian children played together in the streets, their laughter a testament to the power of forgiveness and understanding. And in the heart of the capital, in a broad plaza ringed with statues and monuments, two figures stood tall and proud, cast in gleaming bronze, Keith and Karos side by side, their faces etched with the quiet dignity of those who had given all for the sake of others. It was here that Lara found herself on a warm summer evening, her hair grey and her face lined with the wisdom of years. She made her way slowly to the base of the statue, a single flower clutched in her trembling hand. For a long moment, she stood in silence, gazing up at the faces of the two warriors who had changed the course of history. Then, with a gentle sigh, she laid the flower at their feet, a small, simple tribute to the sacrifices they had made. As she turned to leave, a gust of wind swept through the plaza, carrying with it the scent of distant worlds and the echoes of battles long past. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.